The sun was beating down hard on the dusty streets of Pine Creek Settlement. Thomas Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse-drawn wagon through the rough dirt roads. He had been traveling for 3 days straight from San Francisco, carrying goods to trade in this remote frontier town. His wagon was loaded with supplies that these settlers needed: tools, fabric, medicine, and other essentials that were hard to find this far from the big cities. Thomas was a smart businessman. Over the past 10 years, he had built a successful trading company by being fair and honest with people. Unlike many others who tried to cheat customers, Thomas believed in treating everyone with respect. This approach had earned him a good reputation, and his business was growing every year. As he rode into the main square of Pine Creek, Thomas noticed a crowd gathering near the town's only saloon. People were shouting and pushing to get a better view of something. At first, he thought it might be a horse auction or maybe someone selling livestock. These frontier towns often had such events to bring in money and excitement, but as Thomas got closer, his blood ran cold. What he saw made his heart sink to his stomach. 3 young women stood on a makeshift wooden platform. They looked terrified and exhausted. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and they were clearly not from around here. Thomas could tell immediately. But they were Chinese, like himself. The women kept their eyes down, trembling as a group of rough-looking men shouted prices at them. "Look at this one," yelled a bearded settler, pointing at the tallest girl. "She looks strong enough for farm work." "I need someone for my kitchen," called out another man. "How much for the small one?" Thomas felt sick listening to these men talk about human beings like they were animals at market. The 3 women on the platform looked like they had been through terrible things. Their faces showed fear, sadness, and complete hopelessness. One of the sellers, a dirty man with missing teeth, stood up on a wooden box to address the crowd. "These here Chinese girls were rescued by us from a group of bandits," he announced loudly. "We fought off those criminals and saved these ladies from certain death. Now we're looking for good Christian families to take care of them." Thomas knew this was a lie the moment he heard it. He had seen enough of the world to recognize what was really happening here. These women had not been rescued. They had been bought, sold, or stolen from their families. Maybe their families had been forced to sell them during hard times. Maybe they had been tricked with promises of good jobs in America. Whatever the truth was, Thomas was certain these men were not heroes. The bidding continued, and Thomas watched in horror as the prices went higher and higher. Some of the men bidding looked mean and cruel. He could only imagine what would happen to these poor women if they ended up with the wrong people. Thomas had grown up hearing stories from his own father about the dangers Chinese people faced in America. His father had come to California during the gold rush days when Chinese workers were treated badly and often cheated out of their wages. Thomas himself had faced discrimination and hatred from people who didn't want Chinese immigrants in their towns, but Thomas had been luckier than many. Through hard work and smart decisions, he had built a good life for himself and his family. He owned a large ranch outside of Sacramento, where he lived with his 3 grown sons. His business was successful, and he had earned the respect of many people in his community. Now, looking at these 3 frightened women, Thomas felt a deep responsibility to help them. He thought about his own daughters back home and how he would feel if they were ever in such a terrible situation. The auctioneer was getting ready to finalize the first sale when Thomas stepped forward from the crowd. "Wait," he called out in a loud, clear voice. The crowd turned to look at him. Some people seemed surprised to see a well-dressed Chinese man at their gathering. Others looked suspicious or angry. Thomas didn't care about their reactions. He had made up his mind. "I want to bid on all 3 women," Thomas announced. The auctioneer looked confused. "All 3? That's a lot of money, mister. You sure you can afford that?" Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather pouch filled with gold coins. The crowd went quiet when they saw the money. In those days, gold was the most reliable currency, and Thomas had brought plenty for his trading business. "I can afford it," Thomas said firmly. "Name your price for all 3. The sellers looked at each other with greedy smiles. They hadn't expected someone to buy all three women at once. After a few minutes of whispering among themselves, they came up with a number that was much higher than what individual buyers had been offering. Thomas didn't even try to negotiate. He counted out the gold coins and handed them over. The crowd watched in amazement as this Chinese merchant paid more money than most of them had ever seen in one place. As the transaction was completed, Thomas looked up at the three women on the platform. They stared back at him with confusion and fear. They probably thought they were just being sold to another cruel master. "It's okay," Thomas said to them quietly in Mandarin. "You're safe now." The youngest woman looked up with surprise when she heard her native language. For the first time since Thomas had arrived, he saw a tiny spark of hope in her eyes. Thomas arranged for the women to ride in his wagon, giving them blankets and water for the journey to his ranch. As they left Pine Creek behind, he could feel the curious and sometimes hostile stares of the townspeople following them. During the long ride home, Thomas tried to explain to the women that they were free and safe. He spoke gently in Mandarin, telling them about his family and his home. The women listened carefully, but remained cautious. They had probably been lied to and betrayed so many times that trust would not come easily. As the sun began to set, Thomas's ranch came into view. It was a beautiful property with rolling hills, green pastures, and a large house surrounded by oak trees. For Thomas, this place represented everything he had worked for in America. Tonight it would become a place of refuge and new beginnings for three young women who had lost everything. Thomas knew that buying these women was just the first step. The real challenge would be helping them heal from their trauma and build new lives in a country that was often hostile to people like them. But he was determined to do whatever it took to give them the chance at happiness and freedom that every person deserved. As they approached the house, Thomas could see his sons waiting on the front porch, curious about who their father was bringing home. He had no idea that this moment would change all of their lives forever. The wagon wheels creaked softly as they rolled up the dirt path to Thomas's ranch house. His three sons, David, James, and Robert, stood on the wooden porch watching their father return. They had expected him to come back with supplies and maybe some business news from Pine Creek. They definitely hadn't expected him to bring three frightened young women with him. David, the oldest, at 25, stepped forward first. He had his father's calm personality and serious nature. "Father, what happened? Who are these ladies?" Thomas climbed down from the wagon and helped the three women step onto solid ground. They stayed close together, holding hands like sisters who had been through terrible times together. Their eyes darted nervously between the house, the men, and the surrounding ranch land. "Boys, these young women needed help," Thomas said simply. "They're going to stay with us for a while until they can get back on their feet." James, the middle son, looked concerned. At 23, he had inherited his father's business mind and could sense when something serious was happening. "Are they in some kind of trouble, Father?" "They were in trouble," Thomas replied. "But they're safe now, that's all that matters." Robert, the youngest at 21, noticed how scared the women looked. He had always been the most gentle of the three brothers, with a kind heart that made him sensitive to other people's pain. "They look hungry and tired," he said softly. Thomas nodded. "They've had a very difficult journey. Let's get them inside and comfortable." The ranch house was large and welcoming, with wooden floors and comfortable furniture that Thomas had bought. As his business grew successful, he led the women to the main sitting room, where a fire was already burning in the stone fireplace. "Please sit down," Thomas said in Mandarin. Gesturing to the soft chairs and sofa, the three women looked at each other uncertainly before slowly sitting down together on the sofa. They kept their distance from the men, which Thomas completely understood. After what they had been through, it would take time for them to trust anyone. "What are their names, Father?" David asked. Thomas turned to the women and spoke gently in their language. "Would you like to tell us your names? You don't have to if you're not ready." The tallest woman, who seemed to be the strongest of the three, finally spoke. "My name is Mei Lin," she said in broken English, then continued in Mandarin. "This is Zhao Yu and this is Li Hoa. We don't understand what you want from us." Thomas's heart broke hearing the fear in her voice. He sat down across from them, making sure to keep plenty of distance so they wouldn't feel trapped. "I don't want anything from you," he said clearly in Mandarin. "You are free. You can leave any time you want. I only wanted to help you get away from those bad men." The women stared at him in disbelief. Li Hoa, the youngest, started crying quietly. Xiao Yu put her arm around her friend's shoulders. "You're not going to sell us again?" Mei Lin asked, her voice shaking. "Never," Thomas said firmly. "You are not property. You are human beings who deserve respect and kindness." Over the next hour, Thomas slowly learned their heartbreaking stories. Speaking in quiet voices, the women told him how they had come from poor farming families in China during a terrible famine. Their families had been starving, and men had come to their villages promising good jobs in America for young women who were willing to work hard. "They said we would work in nice houses for rich families," Xiao Yu explained, wiping tears from her eyes. "They said we would earn money to send back to our families." Instead, the women had been put on ships with dozens of other girls and young women. The journey across the ocean had been horrible, with little food and water and no privacy or safety. When they arrived in San Francisco, they discovered the truth about their situation. "They sold us like animals," Mei Lin said bitterly. "Different men bought different girls. We three stayed together only because no one wanted to pay for all of us at once." Li Hua, who had been quiet during most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "We thought you were just another buyer," she admitted. "We thought we would have to work in your fields or your house until we died." Thomas felt anger burning in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and gentle. "You will never be anyone's property." Again, he promised. "Tonight you will sleep in real beds with clean sheets. Tomorrow we will figure out how to help you build new lives." He stood up and called to his housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, an older Mexican woman who had been working for the family for several years. She was kind and motherly, and Thomas knew she would help the young women feel more comfortable. "Mrs. Rodriguez, could you please prepare the 3 guest rooms upstairs? Our visitors will be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Rodriguez took one. Look at the frightened women and immediately understood the situation. She had seen enough of the world to recognize people who had been through trauma. Without asking any questions, she bustled upstairs to prepare comfortable rooms. Thomas then asked his sons to bring in hot water for baths, clean clothes, and food from the kitchen. The 3 young men worked together efficiently, bringing everything the women might need to feel human again. "There are locks on all the bedroom doors," Thomas told the women in Mandarin. "You can lock your doors if it makes you feel safer. No one will bother you or enter your rooms without permission." For the first time since arriving, the women looked slightly less terrified. The promise of privacy and safety was something they hadn't experienced in months. Mrs. Rodriguez came downstairs with an armload of clean dresses and undergarments. "These belonged to my daughters when they were younger," she explained through Thomas's translation. "The young ladies can have them." As evening approached, Thomas showed each woman to her own room. The bedrooms were simple but comfortable, with soft beds, warm blankets, and windows that looked out over the peaceful ranch land. "Tomorrow we will talk more about your options," Thomas told them. "But tonight, just rest. You are safe here." After the women had gone upstairs, Thomas sat with his sons in the kitchen. David, James, and Robert had many questions, but they could see that their father was emotionally drained from the day's events. "Are they really free to leave?" James asked. "Of course," Thomas replied. "I meant every word I said to them." "What?" "If they want to go back to China," Robert wondered. "Then we'll help them find a way to do that safely," Thomas said. "Whatever they decide, we'll support their choice." David nodded thoughtfully. "They're going to need time to heal from whatever happened to them." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "Healing takes time. We need to be patient and kind and let them decide what they want to do with their lives." That night, as Thomas lay in his own bed, he could hear quiet crying from the rooms upstairs. His heart ached for these young women who had suffered so much, but he also felt hopeful. Tomorrow would be the first day of their new lives as free people, and he was determined to help them find happiness again. 3 months had passed since that terrible day at Pine Creek, and life at the Chun Ranch had settled into a peaceful routine. The 3 women were slowly becoming part of the family, though the healing process was happening at different speeds for each of them. Mei Lin, the tallest and strongest of the 3, had surprised everyone with how quickly she adapted to ranch life. She had grown up on a farm in China and knew how to work with animals and crops. Every morning, she would wake up early and walk out to the fields where David was already working. At first, David had been unsure how to act around her. His father had made it very clear that the women were guests, not workers, and should never feel pressured to do anything. But Mei Lin seemed to find comfort in familiar work. "The corn needs water," she told David one morning, pointing to the yellowing plants. She had been learning English quickly and could now have simple conversations. David looked at the field and realized she was right. "How did you know that?" he asked, genuinely impressed. "In China, my family grew corn too," Mei Lin explained. "Plants tell you what they need if you know how to listen." From that day forward, David found himself asking for Mei Lin's advice about farming. She had knowledge about soil and plants that he had never learned, despite growing up on the ranch. When she suggested rotating the crops differently, David tried her method and was amazed at how much better the harvest became. "You're really smart about this," David told her one evening as they walked back from the fields together. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. Mei Lin smiled, and David noticed it was the first time he had seen her look truly happy since she arrived. "My father taught me everything about farming before he died," she said softly. "I like to remember him when I work with plants." Meanwhile, Xiao Yu had discovered a different kind of purpose in her new life. She had noticed that the family's clothes were often torn or worn out from hard ranch work. One day she approached Mrs. Rodriguez and, using a mix of broken English and hand gestures, asked if she could help with sewing. Mrs. Rodriguez was delighted to have help with the endless mending and washing. But Xiao Yu's skills went far beyond simple repairs. She could create beautiful embroidery and decorative stitching that transformed plain work clothes into something special. James, who managed the family's trading business, noticed Xiao Yu's artistic talents when he saw the beautiful patterns she had sewn onto his work shirts. He had always been interested in crafts and artwork, often bringing back interesting fabrics and materials from his business trips. "These designs are incredible," James told her, examining the delicate flowers and birds she had embroidered on a pillowcase. "I've never seen anything like this." Xiao Yu blushed at the compliment. "In China, my mother taught me traditional stitching," she explained. "Each pattern has meaning. This one brings good luck to the family." James started bringing her different threads and fabrics from his travels, as Xiao Yu began creating more elaborate pieces. Soon, she was making beautiful quilts, tablecloths, and decorative wall hangings that made the whole house feel more like a home. "Would you like to come with me to town sometime?" James asked her one day. "I think other people would love to see your work. Maybe we could even sell some pieces." Xiao Yu looked scared at the suggestion. She still felt nervous around strangers, especially after what had happened in Pine Creek, but the idea of her work being valued by others gave her a sense of pride she hadn't felt in a long time. Li Hua, the youngest of the 3, had taken the longest to come out of her shell. She was quiet and shy, often spending hours sitting by herself reading books from Thomas's library. Robert, who loved reading as much as she did, began leaving interesting books outside her door with little notes, written in simple English. "I thought you might like this story about China," one note said. "It reminded me of the stories you told us about your village." Slowly, Li Hua began to trust Robert. They started having quiet conversations in the library where Robert would help her practice English by reading together. Li Hua was incredibly smart and learned the language faster than anyone expected. "You're a very good teacher," Li Hua told Robert one afternoon as they finished reading a book of poems. "In China, I wanted to be a teacher someday." "You still could be," Robert said encouragingly. "There's a small school in the nearest town. Maybe you could help teach the children there." Li Hua's eyes lit up at the suggestion, but then she looked sad. Do you think they would accept a Chinese teacher? Robert thought about this seriously. He knew that many people in their area had prejudiced views about Chinese immigrants, but he also believed that Li Hua's intelligence and kindness would win people over eventually. It might take time, he admitted honestly, but you're one of the smartest people I've ever met. Any school would be lucky to have you. As the months continued to pass, Thomas watched these relationships develop with careful attention. He could see that genuine feelings were growing between the young people, but he was determined to make sure the women never felt pressured or obligated in any way. He had long conversations with each of his sons, reminding them that the women had been through terrible trauma and needed to heal at their own pace. He also spoke privately with Mei Lin, Xiao Yu, and Li Hua, making sure they understood they had choices and control over their own lives. You don't owe our family anything, Thomas told them during one of their weekly talks. If any of my sons makes you uncomfortable, or if you want to leave and start your own life somewhere else, just tell me. I will help you do whatever makes you happy. The women appreciated Thomas's honesty and protection. They had all seen how different this family was from the cruel men who had bought and sold them before. The Chun family treated them with respect and kindness, never demanding anything in return. One evening in late autumn, as the whole family sat around the dinner table sharing stories about their day, Thomas realized how much their lives had all changed. The house felt fuller and happier with the women there. His sons were more mature and thoughtful than they had been before, and the three young women who had arrived broken and terrified were now laughing and contributing to the conversation. Tomorrow is market day in Sacramento, James announced during dinner. Would anyone like to come with me? Xiao Yu, I think Mrs. Patterson would love to see your embroidery work. Xiao Yu looked nervous but nodded. I would like to try, she said quietly. I'll come too, Mei Lin offered. The markets in China were always interesting. I want to see how American markets are different. Li Hua looked thoughtful. Could we stop by the school? I would like to see what American schools look like. Robert smiled. Of course, I'll introduce you to the teacher there. She's very nice. As Thomas listened to his family making plans together, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had started as an act of mercy was becoming something much more beautiful. These 6 young people were building relationships based on genuine care and respect. None of them knew yet where these friendships might lead, but Thomas could see that something special was growing in his home. That night, as he walked through the quiet house before going to bed, Thomas heard the sound of laughter coming from the sitting room. Through the doorway, he saw all 6 young people gathered around the chessboard, teaching each other games from their different cultures. Mei Lin was showing David a Chinese strategy game, while Robert helped Li Hua understand the rules of checkers. For the first time since that horrible day in Pine Creek, Thomas felt truly hopeful about the future. His family was growing in ways he had never expected, and love was beginning to bloom in the most natural and beautiful way possible. 1 year had passed since that fateful day in Pine Creek, and spring was returning to the Chun Ranch. The apple trees were blooming, and the morning air carried the sweet scent of new flowers. It was during this season of renewal that everything began to change for the 6 young people, who had grown so close over the past months. David had been acting strangely for weeks. He would start conversations with Mei Lin and then stop mid-sentence, looking nervous and confused. During their daily walks through the fields, he seemed distracted and kept fidgeting with something in his pocket. Mei Lin noticed his odd behavior, but didn't understand what was causing it. She had grown to care deeply for David over the past year. His kindness and respect for her opinions had slowly healed the wounds in her heart. When he looked at her, she saw genuine affection, not the cruel hunger she had seen in other men's eyes. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from the top of the hill overlooking the ranch, David finally found his courage. Mei Lin, he said, his voice shaking slightly, I need to ask you something important. She turned to look at him, seeing the nervousness in his face. What is it, David? I know you've been through terrible things, he began carefully. And I know My father brought you here to give you freedom and safety. I would never want to take that away from you. Mei Lin felt her heart begin to beat faster. She had wondered if this conversation would ever come. But over this past year, David continued, I've come to care for you very much. Not just as a friend or someone living in our house. I love you, Mei Lin. I love your strength, your intelligence, and your kind heart. He pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket. I'm not asking you to say yes because you feel grateful or obligated to our family. I'm asking because I hope you might feel the same way about me. Would you consider becoming my wife? Mei Lin stared at the ring, her mind racing. A year ago, she had been sold like an animal, with no control over her own life. Now, a good man was asking her to choose her own future, promising to respect whatever decision she made. I need time to think, she said softly. Of course, David replied immediately. Take all the time you need. Nothing changes between us if your answer is no. Around the same time, similar conversations were happening elsewhere on the ranch. James had been working up the courage to speak with Xiao Yu about his feelings. He had watched her transform from a frightened victim into a confident artist whose work was now sold in 3 different towns. Your embroidery tells stories, James told her as they worked together in her sewing room. Every piece you make is like a beautiful book that people can touch and feel. Xiao Yu smiled at his compliment. Over the months, James had become her biggest supporter, always encouraging her artwork and helping her sell pieces to customers who appreciated fine craftsmanship. In China, I dreamed of having my own shop someday, she said wistfully. But that dream seemed impossible after everything that happened. It's not impossible here, James said gently. We could open a shop together. You could teach other women your techniques. You could build something amazing. He paused, gathering his courage. But I don't just want to be your business partner, Xiao Yu. I want to be your husband, if you'll have me. I want to support your dreams and build a life together. Xiao Yu looked surprised but not frightened. The idea of marriage had seemed scary to her for so long, but James had proven himself to be patient and trustworthy. You really think I could have my own shop? She asked. I know you could, James said confidently. You're one of the most talented people I've ever met. Meanwhile, in the library where they spent most of their evenings, Robert was having his own important conversation with Li Hua. She had grown so much in confidence over the past year, and her English was now perfect. She had even started helping teach some of the younger children in town, just as Robert had predicted. The school board wants to offer you a real teaching position, Robert told her excitedly. Mrs. Henderson is getting married and moving away, so they need someone to teach the primary grades. Li Hua's eyes widened with joy. They really want me, even though I'm Chinese? They've seen how smart and kind you are, Robert explained. The children love learning from you, and their parents have noticed how much progress they've made. He took her hands gently. Li Hua, this past year has been the happiest of my life. Not just because you're brilliant and beautiful, but because you understand me in a way no one else ever has. We think the same way about books, about learning, about what's important in life. Li Hua felt tears of happiness beginning to form in her eyes. I love you, Robert continued. I want to marry you and support your teaching career. I want us to fill our house with books and learning and maybe someday teach our own children to love knowledge as much as we do. That evening, the 3 women gathered in Mei Lin's room to talk about what had happened. They had become like sisters over the past year, supporting each other through the difficult process of healing and building new lives. I never thought I would want to marry anyone, Xiao Yu admitted. After what those men did to us, I thought I would always be afraid of being controlled by a husband. But these men are different, Li Hua said thoughtfully. They've proven that they respect us and want us to be happy. Mei Lin nodded. David told me that nothing would change if I said. No, he meant it. I could see it in his eyes. James wants to help me open my own business, Xiao Yu said, still amazed by the idea. He doesn't want to own me or control me. He wants to help me succeed. And Robert wants me to take the teaching job, Li Hua added. He's excited about my career not threatened by it. The three friends talked late into the night, sharing their hopes and fears. They realized that these marriages would be completely different from the fate that had almost befallen them in Pine Creek. These would be partnerships based on love and respect, not ownership and control. The next morning, each woman gave her answer. All three said yes. Thomas was overjoyed when his sons told him the news, but he insisted on speaking privately with each woman to make absolutely certain they were making free choices. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked each of them. "Not what you think you should do, but what will truly make you happy." Each woman assured him that she had found real love and was excited about her future. The wedding preparations took 2 months. Thomas wanted everything to be perfect, honoring both Chinese and American traditions. He contacted other Chinese families in the area to help plan ceremonies that would respect the women's heritage while celebrating their new American lives. The 3 weddings were held on the same beautiful Saturday in June. The entire ranch was decorated with flowers, and tables were set up under the oak trees for the celebration afterward. Chinese lanterns hung alongside American bunting, and the smell of both Chinese and American cooking filled the air. Mei Lin wore a red silk dress that honored Chinese tradition, with gold embroidery that Xiao Yu had created especially for her. Xiao Yu chose a dress that combined Chinese and American styles, showing off her own artistic vision. Li Hu wore white like American brides, but with Chinese symbols of good fortune sewn into the fabric. Thomas walked each woman down the aisle, his heart full of pride and joy. A year ago, these 3 young women had been victims with no hope for the future. Today, they were brides choosing their own destinies with men who loved and respected them. The ceremonies were beautiful, with readings in both English and Chinese. When each couple said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Even some of the neighbors who had been suspicious of the Chinese family were moved by the obvious love and happiness they witnessed. As the sun set on the wedding day, Thomas looked around at his expanded family. His 3 sons had found wonderful wives, and the 3 women who had arrived as strangers had become his daughters. Sometimes, he thought, the most beautiful things in life grow from the most difficult circumstances. 5 years had passed since those beautiful wedding ceremonies under the oak trees, and the Xun Ranch had transformed into something truly magical. What had once been a quiet bachelor household was now alive with the sounds of children's laughter, multiple languages being spoken, and the constant bustle of a thriving extended family. The biggest change was the addition of little ones running around the property. David and Mei Lin had 2 children, 4-year-old Michael, who had inherited his mother's sharp intelligence and his father's gentle nature, and 2-year-old Anna, who was already showing signs of her mother's strong will. The children spoke both English and Mandarin fluently, switching between languages as naturally as breathing. James and Zhao Yu had 3-year-old twin boys, Peter and Paul, who were as different as night and day despite being born minutes apart. Peter was quiet and artistic like his mother, often found drawing pictures or watching Zhao Yu work on her embroidery. Paul was energetic and curious like his father, always asking questions about how things worked and where they came from. Robert and Li Hua had welcomed baby Grace just 6 months ago. Li Hua had continued teaching throughout her pregnancy, and the whole community had celebrated when the newest Chun family member arrived. Grace was a peaceful baby who seemed to love being surrounded by books, often falling asleep to the sound of her parents reading aloud. The ranch itself had grown significantly. David and Mei Lin had expanded the farming operation using techniques that combined American methods with the traditional Chinese knowledge Mei Lin had learned from her father. Their crops were now some of the most successful in the county, and other farmers often came to ask for advice. "The secret is listening to what the land tells you," Mei Lin would explain to visiting farmers. "In China, we learned that every field has its own personality. You have to work with nature, not against it." David beamed with pride whenever he heard his wife sharing her knowledge. The shy, frightened woman who had arrived 5 years ago had become a confident leader in their farming community. Local newspapers had even written articles about their innovative farming methods. Zhao Yu's embroidery business had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. What had started as simple sewing to help the family had become Zhao Yu's of Fine Arts, a workshop that employed 12 other women from the surrounding area. Her pieces were now sold as far away as San Francisco and even back east in New York. I never imagined that Chinese embroidery would become so popular with American customers, Zhao Yu told James as they reviewed their latest sales numbers. When I was little in China, this was just something all women learned to do. Your work isn't just embroidery, James replied, looking at the beautiful wall hanging she had just completed. It's art that tells stories. People can feel the love and skill you put into every piece. The workshop had become more than just a business. It was a place where women from different backgrounds came together to learn from each other. Zhao Yu taught Chinese techniques while learning American quilting methods from her students. The cultural exchange that happened in her workshop every day was exactly the kind of harmony Thomas had hoped to see in his community. Li Hua had indeed become the head teacher at the local school, and her reputation had spread throughout the region. Parents would travel from neighboring towns to enroll their children in her classes. She had a special gift for making learning exciting and helping every child discover their own talents. Mrs. Chun makes even arithmetic feel like an adventure, one parent told Thomas at a community gathering. My son used to hate school, but now he comes home excited to tell us what he learned each day. Li Hua had also started the area's first library program, convincing the town council to fund a small building where families could borrow books. She organized reading groups for both children and adults, and her library had become the heart of the community's intellectual life. But success hadn't come without challenges. The Chin family had faced their share of prejudice and discrimination over the years. Some people in the surrounding towns still viewed Chinese immigrants with suspicion and hostility. There had been incidents. Someone had thrown rocks at Zhao Yu's workshop windows one night. A few parents had initially refused to let their children be taught by Li Hua. Some competitors had spread rumors about David and Mei Lin's farming methods, claiming they were using foreign tricks that couldn't be trusted. Each time something like this happened, the family dealt with it together. They never responded with anger or revenge. Instead, they let their actions speak for them. When Zhao Yu's windows were broken, the community rallied to help repair them, and several customers placed extra large orders to show their support. Hatred comes from fear, Thomas had taught his children and daughters-in-law. When people get to know us as individuals, when they see our good work and kind hearts, most of them change their minds. This philosophy had proven true over and over. Many of the people who had initially been suspicious of the Chinese family had become their strongest supporters once they got to know them personally. The ranch house itself had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. Thomas had added new wings and converted the old barn into additional living space. Every evening, 3 generations would gather around an enormous dinner table, sharing stories from their day in a mixture of English and Mandarin. Grandfather, tell us the story about how you saved Mama and Zhao Yu and Aunt Li Hua. Little Michael would beg at least once a week. Thomas would smile and launch into a simplified version of that day in Pine Creek, always emphasizing the importance of helping people who need assistance and treating everyone with dignity and respect. The children were growing up with a deep understanding of their family's history and the values that had brought them all together. They knew they were part of something special, a family that had been created through compassion rather than just blood relations. As Thomas sat in his favorite chair one evening, watching his sons playing with their children while his daughters-in-law worked on various projects nearby, he reflected on how much their lives had changed. The house was full of love, laughter, and the beautiful chaos that comes with a large, happy family. Letters arrived regularly from China, where Li Hua had managed to reconnect with some distant relatives. The families back home were amazed to hear about the success and happiness their daughters had found in America. Some were even making plans to visit, hoping to see this wonderful new life for themselves. Do you ever regret what you did that day in Pine Creek? David asked his father. During one of their evening walks, Thomas considered the question seriously. That decision had cost him a significant amount of money and had changed all their lives in ways he never could have predicted. Never, he said firmly. That was the day our real family began. Everything good that has happened since then started with choosing to do the right thing, even when it was difficult and expensive. As they walked back toward the house, they could see the warm glow of lamplight in the windows and hear the sounds of their family inside. Children were being read bedtime stories in 2 languages. Yayu was showing Lihua a new embroidery pattern. Mei Lin was planning the next day's farm work with James. You know what makes me happiest? Thomas said to his son. It's not just that we saved 3 women from a terrible fate. It's that they saved us too. They made our family complete in ways we never knew we needed. The Chun family had become a symbol of hope in their community. Their story proved that love could triumph over hatred, that people from different backgrounds could create something beautiful together, and that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that help other people. As Thomas tucked his grandchildren into bed that night, listening to their sleepy chatter about tomorrow's adventures, he knew that the legacy they were building would last for generations. These children would grow up understanding that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, respect, and the willingness to help others when they need it most. The story that had begun with such darkness and cruelty had become a tale of light, hope, and the enduring power of human kindness.